Nathan Radabaugh, what's happening? Welcome to Hangry and Horny.
Thank you for having me, Tony.
It's awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on, taking the time, taking me through the redwood forest here. And where are we, actually?
Well, this is called Pomo Canyon Campgrounds. This is out near Jenner on the coast here in Northern California. And the campground's shut down right now. But I found about this a few weeks ago, stumbled here, and it's pretty magical having this place to ourselves.
Yeah, you like actually camped out with a friend.
That's right. Yeah, I camped out with a friend here and went hiking. And microdosed on some LSD, so it's a really good time here for sure.
Nice, man. You actually found this little like hut that was put together.
Very neat. Yeah, absolutely. And it was really cool crawling inside, and there's even a back exit door on there. Someone put some work into that.
Yeah, we actually sat in there for a little bit and just kind of like soaked it in.
Absolutely.
Pretty cool.
Very cool.
So your background, you came out of the Midwest. What part of which part of the states were you?
Yeah, absolutely. Came from Wichita, Kansas. That's where I was born and raised.
All right, man.
Yeah.
Wizard of Oz stuff. Huh?
Absolutely. Dorothy and click your heels. Yeah.
That's cool. So, you know, you have a lot in your background in regards to, you know, being in the military. What were you doing like before that? How did you get into the military?
Absolutely. So, yeah, growing up in Wichita, Kansas, definitely conservative life. Grew up very religious. I wanted to get out and explore the world. And so when I was in my senior year of high school, I heard about how the Navy will pay for your school and you get to travel. And that sounded like a lot of fun to me. I've always had a desire of living in another country and experiencing other cultures. And I thought the Navy would be a perfect way to do that. And so right after I graduated high school in 2003, I joined the Navy and took off.
And were you the first person in your family to join the military?
First person since my grandfather,
Okay.
actually. So my grandfather was Korean War era. And I was the first person since him to join the military.
Got it.
Yeah.
So once you joined, what was going on? Like, how did you get to the place where you became a Navy corpsman?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I joined initially as a Navy, signed up as a Navy corpsman, I was told I'm going to be on the Navy ships and working in Navy hospitals and floating around the world.
So you knew exactly what you wanted to sign up for? Or they
I did, yeah.
Okay.
So I picked that job before I went. I threw a few recommendations. It sounded like a lot of fun. You know, being an EMT essentially is the way it was described to me prior. Quickly realized when I went to boot camp and corpsman school that wasn't necessarily the full picture. Come to find out, Marine Corps is Department of the Navy. And all of their medical support is actually Navy corpsmen. And so after my first Navy schooling, they sent me to the Marine Corps base to do my field medical service school. And this is where I learned how to do combat medicine. And so this was a big segue from hospital medicine, from nursing, and now they're teaching me how to wear a Marine uniform, teaching me how to shoot a gun, and getting me ready to join a Marine unit.
And actually be in combat.
That's right, absolutely. I changed my orders while I was there and volunteered to go with the Marines at that time. During this time frame, it was at the height of the war.
Which one?
The Iraq War was going on. Both Iraq and Afghanistan war were going on.
The second time around, not the Gulf War.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, this is
like
the one after 9/11. That's right, yeah. And so I decided to change my orders and go support them. And then after my plans were after the Marines, and I could go travel around the world with the Navy. And so my orders got changed, and I got assigned to a Marine Infantry unit. It was 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines out of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Wow, man. So you go through the training to be a combat medic and soldier.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then when were you first deployed?
I was first deployed during 2005.
Okay.
So I quickly was assigned to a Marine Corps Infantry unit, like I was saying, and we deployed. We went on 2 7-month-long tours while I was with the Marines. First deployment was outside of Fallujah, where the main unit was based out of Camp Fallujah, and then all the companies had different locations. This was right after the Fallujah offensive. That's a real famous Fallujah war, and we came to secure for the elections our unit. On our second deployment, we came for the Battle of Ramadi.
Okay, so Ramadi is like close to.
Yeah, so this is all in the Al-Anbar province of Iraq.
Okay.
And during that time, there was freedom fighters coming in from other countries. The insurgency was high. There was a lot of conflict, and a lot of combat happening. Yeah.
So you're like in 2 like hotbeds, like
That's right.
back to back.
That's right.
Holy shit, dude.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
it was intense time. Yeah, absolutely. Even on my first deployment, a month into it, I was involved in an IED explosion that injured me, but not enough to go home. It definitely banged me up enough where they had me, stay calm, sit at my battalion aid station for a while, and then rejoin my Marine unit.
How long did that take to recover from?
Honestly, I had about a week off, and then I was on limited duty, which is in the middle of combat is a little bit hard to limit your duty, which involved more radio watches for me then. And but I stayed with my Marine unit. They were still in combat operations, and I was their medical support, and it was really important for me to get back and be there next to them.
Yeah, so even though you had concussion symptoms and you didn't actually have any body parts blown, did you get shrapnel or
no shrapnel? So I was lucky there. I didn't have anything like that. The vehicle that I was in they call it a 7-ton. They had big IED underneath the road from artillery rounds, and these caused the vehicle to flip and roll.
Okay.
To do barrel roll into the ditch. I had a vehicle rolled on top of me during this process and pushed me down, so I got a torn groin muscle. My leg was pulled up. It was banged up.
Yeah, obviously you're still intact.
Yes.
But you're lucky.
Very much so. I've had some definitely mobility issues that I've used yoga to work through, and also some body work as well. To get to the point where I don't have any issues anymore, but I have definitely had some mobility issues that have caused things like shin splints, and I've had other issues before that I've learned how to correct.
And you were able to restore it to pretty much full functionality.
Very blessed.
Wow.
I'm very blessed to have my health. I am just blown away that blown away. I'm amazed. Yeah. I'm amazed and blessed. Yeah, amazed and blessed.
Literally.
How I was able to come home and walk away from that. We did lose one Marine during that IED explosion, and others were hurt and injured much worse than I was. I was the one that was rendering aid to them. And I was 19 years old when this happened.
Yeah.
Really young.
And what was the recovery like? I mean, they put you on some kind of hiatus to recover, but it was only like a week later that you rejoined.
That's right.
Your group.
Yep, so ibuprofen.
Okay. And so what was the feeling like during the impact? The sound,
Absolutely.
I mean, it rolled over. It actually fell on you. The
vehicle. So this is a vehicle that's very large. These tires are 4 feet in diameter. They're giant tires on these trucks. And when it rolled on, when the IED detonated, it happened so fast that all of a sudden my ears are ringing and there was black smoke everywhere. And I remember hearing the tires screeching as the vehicle was losing control and going into the ditch. There's definitely a thought in my head, we just got hit and this is going to hurt. And the vehicle rolled. I stayed with the vehicle and it rolled on top of me, smashed me down in the mud. I felt a truck's weight on top of me, pushing the air out of my lungs. The thought crossed my mind that this was it, that I was done. And then the truck kept rolling and rolled off of me.
Oh shit! So it rolled it was quick.
It barrel rolled, but it's an open.
So you were on the top of it.
Yeah. So the way it is, you have this front, the front cab, and this is all armored. But behind it, you have these long bench seats where Marines sit on these bench seats facing outwards.
Oh, I could see what those trucks look like. Yeah.
And so when this thing flipped and rolled, and most people got ejected. There was 17 casualties during the situation. One Marine died, and it was a really wild time. 17
casualties.
Yeah,
so there were other
there was
people
a mixture.
on the
Absolutely,
truck.
Marines had there was shattered scapula. We had Marines and members saying they couldn't feel their legs, and there was this crying and all kinds of emotions were going on during that time frame. A lot of fear.
Okay.
Thank goodness we weren't ambushed.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you next. Is usually there's a follow-up attack from there.
Yeah, we were really lucky that we didn't.
Wow.
And we were able to medevac all the Marines and myself included. I was part of the medevac.
Okay,
and so
a helicopter flew in?
No, not at all. It's actually in another armored vehicle, and this kind of got tank tracks on it. It's fully enclosed. And this is what we medevac back in.
Okay.
And then once we got to the surgical unit, door came down, all medical teams there, and started directing, this guy needs first, second, third, and then I need help.
Okay. And so what was attended to you on yourself?
Yeah. So this is, like I said, more contusion. So I went through some x-ray processes. I was on crutches. I wasn't able to walk. I was coming down off an adrenaline high that night. I remember vomiting because of the adrenaline. And they put me on that night. I was on morphine and other drugs. I'm not for sure what it was, but I do remember being extremely high and not very coherent. And then it was the next day where I had the worst thing they told me is when I had to call my mother. And at first I said, there's no way I'm calling my mother and letting her know this happened. Like, this will destroy her. And they said, it's military protocol that somebody's going to be calling your mother. You should be the first person to do it so she doesn't get any more scared. And I hadn't talked to my mother in weeks. It was the first part of the deployment. We were getting involved in the operations, but I didn't get a lot of opportunities to call home yet. So calling her, she was so excited. Oh, my God, how are you doing?
And this is like your first ever deployment.
Deployment.
Weeks in.
That's right. Just a month into a 7-month-long tour, and I'm already hurt.
Wow.
So this is really setting the stage. I'm like, okay, combat's really real. I could hear my mom's heart just hit the ground when I told her the news that I was injured, but going to be okay. And I'm not injured. I have all my arms and legs. I'm going to have full recovery. Of course, that's not good enough news for my mom. She wanted me to come home.
Yeah, and you're pretty lucid.
I was very lucid, yeah. This was the next day. I was very lucid and was able to just explain to my mom what was going on, what happened, and why I can't come home. And, yeah, so I finished that deployment up, and we definitely, I had, through that deployment, treated casualties, both American and Iraqi casualties from the war.
In the combat zones, in the actual areas of fighting.
That's right, areas of fighting. Marines getting blown up in IEDs.
Shot at. You're shooting back yourself.
Yeah.
And you were saying earlier that you haven't killed anybody as far as you know.
Right, yeah. And so my first deployment, it was intense. On our second tour to Iraq, it was much more intense. As we're getting briefed in Ramadi about how the other unit became almost combat ineffective because of how many casualties they received, and talking about corpsmen dying, was in even more a deeper reality set in. Whereas, like, on my first deployment, it was already intense and got blown up, but now I'm in a combat zone. It's much more intense, much more combat. And I remember sitting in my bunk at night after this briefing, having my first ever panic attack. I was married. I got married between my two deployments, and so now I had something to lose. And that scared the shit out of me. And I remember having hyperventilating and then getting myself to get under control.
Was there anybody around you when you're
Everybody
sleeping?
was sleeping.
Okay.
And so I just stayed with my breath, got my physiology under control, stuffed that fear down and deep, and pressed forward for the deployment.
And this is like the famous Ramadi battle that we were talking about with Jocko.
That's right. Same battle, same time frame when he was deployed. His unit was deployed the same time that 3-8, my unit, was deployed, and we've seen interactions. They've come to our forward bases. And
the Navy SEALs.
The Navy SEALs did, yeah, absolutely. Came in there with their high-speed gear and really cool guns, and they brought us chips and cookies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Marines are definitely the type of people that can do more with less and like to tough it up, be tough. And so they didn't like to give us a lot of niceties. And so it was really wonderful having the Navy SEALs come out and bring us some cookies and chips from theirs, because Navy SEALs notoriously have amazing funding and have amazing food. Okay. And so they shared some of that with us.
And so that's just more because they've been screened. They're much more skilled.
They're part of the Special Operations Command, so they have funding that's practically unlimited in comparison. And so they just have a different way of operating than the infantry. Much different way of operating.
Yeah, because I remember Andrew Marr, which was our special guest on the show in the earlier parts of Hangry and Horny, being part of the Green Beret Army branch of Special Forces, and was saying that they had as much with whatever they needed to get. They had the purchasing power to buy all the equipment. Mm-hmm. So. But my question is, how come they get special treatment versus the rest of the military?
Because they're special forces.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the title. So I mean,
Yeah.
because they've been screened and they
Yeah, I'd
have
say they're
certain
they're elite.
aptitudes.
They're the elite. They're what people say the best of the best. There's a really strict, obviously, screening process. Everybody knows, as we may have seen documentaries with the Navy SEALs or the Green Berets, and they have an even more intensive training, and they hold a different mission.
Yeah.
And so I believe that's part of the combination of different. They just have a different mission and a different purpose for the military, and they treat them well because of it. Yeah, a little bit opposite of the Marine Corps Infantry.
Yeah, yeah. So back to that actual battle. Second time it was even more intense.
That's right.
And you have like a panic attack before going into it. And so what made it more intense than the first time? Because there was more like actual fighting.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It was just more gunfighting. So it was just
more
almost daily, more casualties, more gunfighting. We had over 100 casualties in total during that deployment. Well, I believe we had 17 deaths, I want to say. And so a lot more people died, a lot more people got injured than our first deployment.
And you're seeing this like firsthand, obviously.
That's right.
Like just the volume of it was
right. Everything
turned up
from freedom fighters, snipers, rockets, everything. Yeah.
And we were also mentioning earlier about like the role of like a chaplain and sort of religious or the sectarian side of things. And at this point you were saying like, I'll take whatever I can get to live, including
absolutely.
prayer.
Yes.
You grew up in a religious like upbringing.
That's right.
Were you at that time in high school like rebelling against it, or still always been a part of your foundation?
Been a part of my foundation. I gravitated heavily towards the Christian church, towards the youth group, an amazing community outreach, an amazing community created within youth, and it was something that I was really attracted to. When I joined the military, I definitely began distancing myself from religion. I think it was because I started to party. I started to hang out with rough and tough crowd. And I think a lot of the shame, I started to distance myself from a lot of the religion. Though on deployment, I prayed. Any help, I wasn't going to push that away when I was on deployment. I definitely prayed and had a Bible with me. And it definitely brought comfort and brought strength for me when I was deployed. Yeah.
So you get like these occasional visits from the chaplain who would come on the convoy.
The chaplain was always the breath of fresh air coming in. He was the one coming in, checking on everyone's morale, everyone's mood, spiritual counseling, psychological counseling. They were there for the chaplains were there for support, and they're also Navy chaplains. So, you had a little bit of Navy mix in with the Marines on deployment.
That's amazing. And also you have the reporters. You see this in war movies all the time. So what was their role and their title?
Yeah, so they had the combat camera, and the combat camera, they would come and document combat. And so that was their job, and they did this for the military. And so they, from time to time, were embedded with our unit. So when we go on combat patrols, you would have this combat camera with us. And this is the military's version of it. And also we had CNN and other news agencies embedded with us as well. So you had them coming out and going on patrols with cameras, documenting the action on the front lines.
Wow, man. So back in the days, they didn't really have a camera. They were actually doing this by hand.
Doing everything. Oh, back in the day, yeah, absolutely.
Right. Like World War II.
Well, as you can remember the
War I,
infamous picture of Iwo Jima and the combat camera up there on the hill taking the flag raising with the Marine unit.
So
and there was a Navy corpsman in that flag raising as well. So there's always just been this rich history of Navy corpsmen alongside the Marines.
Documentation.
Right.
Wow. So not only just for historical purposes, but for like evidence in regards to if this ever had to appear in martial court or something like that.
That definitely could be the case if it's there. More so, it seemed like more documentation. We didn't inquire too heavily what it's about, but it was always interesting to see the footage after a firefight and to have the combat camera showing us with their night vision cameras what they recorded. And so there's definitely some amazing playbacks that.
And also, what about the psychology of your own perspective and whether it matched the evidence of the footage? Was there ever a mismatch? Like you played in your mind, you saw something kind of similar to eyewitness testimony. It just gets skewed, right?
Oh, absolutely. We've definitely had what they call it red tape that you have to go through, where you have moments of combat and a when we have action, sometimes there's investigations open up if there's any wrongdoing, or if a civilian got injured. They want to investigate and find out if it was a just cause, if this was something that could have been avoided, and so use these as like training tools. They also do this sometimes to persecute the Marines that did something out that they shouldn't have done, and so there's definitely this a sense of accountability as well with the military.
Yeah, this is, you know, and I really appreciate you being very open, you know, because it's one of those things as a civilian, but also like, you know, growing up with a grandfather that was served in both World War II and the Korean War, it was something that was a bit taboo. So the fact that like we can go deep into these discussions, you know, I really appreciate that. And you know, it just helps me to be able to like answer questions that I'm sure like everybody else has, because a lot of people are making like projections or assumptions about, you know, what it's like to be in it, but to actually hear like a first-hand account of what's going on and the emotions involved, like, you know, even like the physiology, like, so when you're going through all these battles, like, how is it that you're able to like keep yourself together, especially like the first deployment where like right off the bat, like you get blasted and you have to recover and then you have to keep going?
There's a tool that I hear Jocko Willing talk a lot about on his podcast, is the ability to disassociate. So you have to remove yourself from the your emotional body and disconnect to be able to have more of a broader perspective of what's going on. And so definitely on my deployment, I was able to not get too mixed up with what's going on. I understood this was this, and I'm over here. And so there was also, too, the culture of people weren't talking about emotions and feelings. You know, anger was one of the common feelings, definitely happiness. From time to time, everyone likes to joke and bring some positivity in a really shitty situation. Yeah.
So the ability to just kind of get the job done, you know, I mean, was there any place for like counseling or the ability to like kind of step back and like kind of have a reprieve, or it was just like keep going?
Just keep going.
Yeah,
definitely it was a make or break kind of situation. I've seen people that were in the military who broke, who emotionally couldn't handle it, and everybody has a breaking point.
Yeah.
And so I definitely witnessed that firsthand. It was one of those that I believe I gained a lot of strength and power from those I was surrounded with. I was surrounded by the tip of the spear. Marine Corps Infantry in our unit, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines, was a badass unit, and I had amazing Marines that protected my ass. See, the Marines look at Navy Corpsmen and they call them Doc. Everyone's Doc. They almost don't even know your name, but it's Doc. And we're the guys that are going to pull them out of fire when they're hurt. We're the guys that are going to patch them up when they get injured. And so they definitely take care of us, and they want to. And for me, they would almost want to put you in between all them and the enemy.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, put you behind. Sorry, put me behind them and themselves in between the enemy.
Yeah.
So they're almost like our protectors as well.
Right. Because while you're like there saving them, you're still getting shot at.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, when no one's hurt, I'm essentially playing the role as a Marine, as a combat. You know, I have a rifle, and the way that, even though when we deployed, it was deployed as a non-combatant, but I also looked at it as preventative medicine. If someone's shooting at us, I'm going to shoot back. And I wasn't going to stand by, but the minute somebody gets hurt, my role completely changes, and I go right into the doc role, and I'm there to patch them up.
And then you have the guys backing you up.
That's right.
From there.
That's right. And they're all my security, and they're there as I'm protecting the Marine, getting them patched up, and we'll get them medevaced out of there. So that was my role, to be there on the front line. So, and it was not only just gunshot wounds, IED explosions, but anything from, you know, basic counseling and conversation. So that, you know, I would definitely get interactions with Marines coming to me, telling me what's going on with them and how they're feeling, just a little bit. But definitely the culture was not, like I said, wasn't a very emotional culture. It was definitely a hardened warrior culture.
And so that comes out, like, spills out after the fact when you're like back home. What's going on, you know, when you come back home from deployment? Is there something that like triggers? Because there's all these talks about PTSD, or some people don't even call it a disorder. It's just more like a symptom.
There's definitely, so one, my physiology was definitely hijacked a little bit. And so I was sensitive to even a car backfiring, as people would say, someone opening up a can of Coca-Cola and it makes that loud pop noise, and you can laugh when you see people in combat jumping down. And that lasted for a while afterwards. And when I took orders to row to Spain afterwards, and I did this intentionally, I knew that if I were to transition back to being a civilian right after combat, that I would have a really hard time integrating back in, because being surrounded by infantry Marines, it's a very different culture than typical civilization. And so I looked at Spain, 3 year orders in Spain, as an opportunity for me to have some fun, unwind, and enjoy life a little bit before I got out.
Yeah, and then go back to the regular, real world.
The real world, yeah.
So at a certain point, you were talking about, the emotion of actually defensively killing somebody, because there was a part of your psyche that was sort of looking forward to that aspect of combat where you had to justify self-defense to shoot back if somebody's shooting at you and actually killing another human being.
Absolutely. I think internally I almost thought of war as a rites of passage. So many of my grandfathers being in war and hearing about all these stories, I think there's part of this warrior ethos that I was really wanting to be part of. And like I was telling you before the podcast, I was a non-combatant. And so there's definitely a part of me that was vocal about I would be happy if I didn't have to shoot my rifle and everybody came home. That being said, being in the middle of combat, there was also another part of me that wanted a piece of the action. And I wanted to experience all aspects of war, good and bad. And so I definitely shot my rifle. I didn't personally, from my knowledge, kill anybody. And I definitely wasn't going out of my way to find those opportunities. I definitely stayed in my role as a Navy corpsman.
Right. And so, when you hear about PTSD symptoms, what were some of the ones that you experienced, whether you're in Spain, and how long did it take you to get to a place where you felt fairly integrated again?
Okay, good question. Yeah, so definitely in Spain, it would come out anger, outburst, emotional outburst. However, I was still in the context of the military. So the military provided my ethos, provided my food, my water, how to live life. It's when I got out of the military is when I really started to struggle. And so about a year after getting out is when, I didn't have a sense of purpose when I got out. And I didn't know how to process emotions that I had been stuffing deep, deep down inside. They started to come to the surface. And so this kind of, these repressed feelings was something that I struggled with dealing with for a while, and was having panic attacks and wasn't able to cope. And I dealt with depression, and suicidal thoughts have crossed my mind. Now, I didn't get to the point where I ever went to that level of wanting to kill myself. However, the feelings of hopelessness and despair were there. And it took years of when I finally realized how bad of a place I was in. We call it rock bottom. When I realized how emotionally dead I was inside and not connected to all the beautiful things in life, it really triggered me on a journey to peel back the layers of this onion. And I felt like, and this is the metaphor that I use, but it was this process of getting out of my own way and peeling back these layers of trauma and getting them out of the way. And now, mind you, it wasn't just from the military and from combat. See, I find that combat exacerbated a lot of my weaknesses that I had before coming in. So whether it's childhood wounds or mother-father issues, these type of things I found for myself were exacerbated through combat. And so as I've been on this journey, really uncovering the trauma, getting to the root of it, and finding the gold at the bottom has been what's kind of given me the power now to even have these kind of conversations, where before I might have avoided the conversation, or going there, I might have spiraled down emotionally and gone to a period of depression.
Or been defensive.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
Trying to avoid versus, going into it.
Going into it and, clearing it out and, coming out the other side more complete, more whole.
That's right.
Yeah, and you also had mentioned that, you know, just as hard was combat was finding out that your wife at the time cheated on you,
Yeah.
and you said that that was actually worse than going through combat in some
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I was vulnerable. I loved the woman very much, and that betrayal, it really tore me open. And I had to go. I went through a period of, I definitely had a lot of hate towards women and a lot of anger issues around it. And that was something when I began working with ayahuasca, is when I really started to uncover a lot of what was going on in terms of these issues around women. And I began to understand the value of what women bring into society. And like, as we were saying on the walk-in, women make the world go round.
Yeah, exactly. And so as you're going through this healing process, what were some of the things that kind of brought you to that area? Like, did you like right off the bat just think like, oh, I'm having these issues, I need to go explore these areas? Or did somebody show up, or a book, or like, how did you know to get into a place where you can start to heal and then eventually start using plant medicines and psychedelics as a tool to help you become whole and complete?
When I was living in Spain, it was when I first had my first taste at yoga, first taste at meditation. So I'd say there's a part of me that definitely began to gravitate that way. And you say maybe higher self, but definitely I was being guided in the direction, and started becoming friends with people who not only Spanish locals, but friends who mine were yoga teachers, meditation teachers, and definitely more on the more liberal side of things, if you will. And so I found myself become more gravitated towards those things. When I smoked weed for my first time in Spain, that was an experience that completely cracked open my head in a way that I realized prior beliefs that I held were wrong. And I began this journey of inquiry and questioning, where I started to really look at myself in a different way and question a lot of the beliefs that I held. And I would say that was honestly one of the major catalysts for me to get out of the military and for me to live life.
So you had the option to keep on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I could have re-enlisted and I could have stayed in. They told me doing so, they're going to send me back with the Marines, which I would have ended up in Afghanistan. And after two tours, I was done. I didn't want to go back anymore. I watched too many people. The more times you deploy, the worse your chances are of coming home.
Right. And this also flew in the face of joining the Navy and traveling the world and seeing other places.
Yeah,
it was like, no, I'm going to throw you right back in the fire shitstorm, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I knew then that I wanted to go to school. I had this huge passion around the way that cannabis allowed me to feel and see things a little bit differently. And so I started, when I was going to school part-time in the Navy, I was getting my associate's degree finished so I could transfer out as a junior to go to the university. I began to do a lot of research on cannabis legalization, on the medicinal aspects of cannabis, and that's what drew me to go to California for school. Honestly, was cannabis was a major aspect.
Yeah, because California, Colorado, the whole western side of the states was groundbreaking, like leading this. In terms of legalization of cannabis as a medicine and then recreational. So cannabis also like reacquainted you back to nature.
That's absolutely not nature, with myself, with spirituality, and it gave me a different outlook on life. And I would definitely say it was the gateway drug for me to begin to explore other consciousness expanding substances. So not only things like psychedelic mushrooms or LSD. And so that really opened my eyes to really kind of dig into myself. And when I moved to Chico, California to go to school, because I heard Chico was the place to be. You could party, good weed, pretty girls. So it was enough motivation at the time for me to go out to Chico. And so moving out there is definitely, I had my mind even opened even more, being around a culture that is not conservative, Republican, Christians like I grew up, and being in the military, there's a lot of conservative Republican views. And so then moving out here to California, there was the complete opposite spectrum of things out here. The hippies. Peace and love. Yeah, absolutely. And it was a really amazing transition for me to kind of change my environment in a way that I was going to able to open up more. And definitely when I had my first experience with LSD is when I honestly understood where I could be going and where I was at the time. And I saw what was holding me back, and I wanted to work towards really uncovering my own potential.
Right. So, yeah, there's so many like directions we can go on this for sure. So you're at Chico, you have this whole other contrast of experiences, and like at what point of your healing now is like arising? How much have you healed? How much further you had to go to this point where we are right now?
Absolutely. So, many things along the way. I was saying everything I could find that would potentially benefit me, I was absorbing. I definitely have been in this state, and I still am, of finding things that allow me to feel more whole, and I bring more of those in my life. So definitely different types of psychedelic journeys. Men's work was really profound experience for me, to be able to find a community, a brotherhood again, where I'm able to process a lot of what's going on inside, these emotions, these feelings, and have accountability.
So there's that tribe that a lot of veteran soldiers that come back miss, that camaraderie.
That's
with
right.
their crew, their platoon group, and so you're able to reestablish that community of brotherhood.
That's right.
And then what other type of tools came into your life besides that in psychedelics?
One of the biggest physiological shifts I felt was when I began Reiki and breathwork therapy in Berkeley with Dr. Mia. She has a health center called Breathe, and it was my first intro into breath work and understanding how powerful it was, and having these amazing cathartic experiences where I remember feeling associated, being in my childhood room throwing a temper tantrum, and there I am in this set having these experiences, and they're literally just releasing.
So you had like a time regression
during
absolutely.
The breath work? Yeah, during the breath work, where in my own imagination during Reiki and breathwork therapy, they lead you through a guided breath work, and this triggers a lot of cathartic release. So depending on what you have repressed is what was going to come up. And so under their thought process is like this sadness or this anger needs to be experienced to be able to let it go. And so these were these moments where complete vulnerability and crying for long periods of time, and sadness and anger. Anger would turn into sadness. And so there's a lot of this releasing that happened. And I felt the world start to show up in a lot different way as well. It was really interesting as I started to heal trauma, I began to see more of the beautiful things that was going on. And honestly, through a lot of these different therapies, whether it's men's work, whether it's breathwork therapy, community, it's allowed me to get to a place where I feel safe and secure in myself to be able to talk about this. Like I said, I've only been recently, I feel like, able to dive in and be real with myself. And it took me diving into my shadows and understanding my dark side even more. And that's allowed me to kind of hold the light in the same way. It's like I went on this journey of healing, and for a while it was all about the light. Bring more light, bring more light, bring more light. And I found that also created an imbalance, that it's just as important to really dig into the shadows. And that way you kind of brings contrast to the light. And it's like it's not a good or a bad thing, the darkness. The darkness is what it is.
Yeah, in the sense of once you're like more integrated, there's a sense of being more full, whole in one, complete. And so like you were saying before, like as much as a lot of these tools are amazing, they have their way of their language of communicating, whether it's talking about like chakras or but if you could just like glean the gold nuggets out of all these methods, because even some of these methods can get perverted, become into a cult kind of thing, and people start drinking like urine. We were joking about earlier. It's like, maybe there is some medical benefits that still needs to be researched on this, but we still have like a sense of like, maybe I shouldn't go down this rabbit hole, even though I'm like very open-minded. I'm very skeptical too, and that you going into this path of healing, there's a dark side to those healing arts as well, where they use it for power control. Self-development can turn into like an addiction with self-help, all those kind of things. And some of these teachers are far more worse psychologically, and they like make up for it by becoming a leader and doing the imposter syndrome, right?
Absolutely.
As you're talking about. So what were some of your experiences as you were going through these different rabbit holes of healing?
Oh. Well, definitely in the yoga community, I've seen that as well. Mind you, there's this whole American yoga, which is a lot different from my understanding. I have not been to India, but from friends, a lot of friends of mine have visited, and they say the practice of yoga looks a lot different over in India, where it comes from. And I've seen a lot of spiritual bypassing going on in the healing community. A lot of coping with, like we were saying, these words where people start to use languaging they've read through all these self-help books, and they start to, assimilate that knowledge. And I respect where they're at. And I've been there too, where I've sounded pretty woo-woo out there. And I think it's all about this integration. So it's like, as I expose myself to different therapies, different cultural practices, it's been important for me to find what works in it and then integrate that in my life and not become something that I'm not. So it's like, stay real and then have fun with myself, because definitely don't want to take myself too seriously going down this healing path. Like, humor is 100% part of it.
Right. And that's probably like one of the red flags to look for when you start going into these cultures that are like borderline cults.
Absolutely.
When it gets like too serious, and like, that the set intention and a prayer for like every action that they're doing, and like, be in the power of now, like every moment, and not leave any room for, future like imagination or analyzing like the traumas of the past per se.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's one of those things that I guess you have to, with time and exposure and being around people that are actually questioning and, like you said, having fun, because it gets a little bit like perverse at times, and that's the same thing with psychedelics. So many benefits with that and other medicines and other practices, but then it gets skewed by like these, we were talking about like cultural appropriation, right? Or like people of certain racial ethnicities start to take on the practices in terms of even the way one dresses, or they'll like claim the real estate of that. For example, like having dreadlocks, right? And it's like, oh, that's only black people are supposed to have dreadlocks, and then it's like, no, it's actually like dreadlocks been in the Viking era, and then like in the India with the sadhus, and so it's not just exclusive to one race, as with like sweat lodges, like you were saying that a particular group was saying like, we can't say sweat lodges anymore, we have to call it purification
and renewal ceremonies. And I almost laughed at this too. It's like, I appreciate when people come, with big hearts, and it's what's drawn to the healing arts is people I do feel that have great intentions and sometimes can be misguided at the same time.
Yeah, it gets a little like Looney Tunes, where they're just overly positive. My buddy and I, we were in Vancouver one time, and we went to a raw food restaurant. And we get to the counter to order food, and the girl goes like, how's your day? And we're like, oh, our day's great. We were just walking around Vancouver. We stopped by a shop, we're ready to eat. And we're like, how's your day? And then she puts her two hands together in a like prayer gesture and says, it's blissful, right? And she has a turban on, and she's a white chick. And she's like, it's blissful, right? And I was like trying to like keep myself together, and fortunately I didn't laugh out loud in front of her. But as soon as we got our food and started back on our walk, I said to my buddy, I was like, how's your day today? Is it blissful? And he just like, he lost it, man. He was like in tears, just fell over the sidewalk, and so it's just one of those things is like, we can maybe tease each other, we can tease ourselves. There's a point where we get like, it's okay to be sensitive, because that means you're aware of your surroundings, you're aware of your interactions with people. But at the same time, like, you can't get like too serious about, the way you dress. If you feel called to like wear your hat a certain way, that's cool, you're expressing yourself. And to be able to, one of the conversation we were talking about was the empowerment of women, right? the ability to not walk around in fear that when a questionable male figure comes into their vicinity and almost like pretty much threatens them, they could like look them direct in the eye and say no, and at least present that energy so that that person that's about to attack them or do harm to them could just second guess, like, oh no, I can't mess with that person. And sometimes that's all it takes, is to be able to stand firm in your own presence and look directly in the eye and say no, the way we would say, like you were saying, when you're little.
When my dog, when she acts out, and if I were to be real sweet, like, no, my dog's name is Bunny, and it'd be like, no, Bunny, no, Bunny. She's a pit bull. She's a pit bull, and if I'm all sweet to her, she's going to look at me like I'm playing a game, and she's going to be dominant on me.
And so, she's a pit bull that's rescued from Oakland.
That's right.
That just, like, basically was a boony dog, like, cruising around, right?
That's right.
So if you just say no, but
yeah, it's about stepping into your own power, learning that we all have the ability to be dominant, we have the ability to be submissive, but exercising that power, especially when setting boundaries. So with my dog, when she does something out of line, I'm going to say no, and the same thing goes with any human being. I think it's important for all of us to be able to speak up, and especially for women. You know, I've seen a lot in women where they want to kind of pull away and go inside versus stepping out. And so I was like telling you about that interview I heard with a dominatrix who teaches women empowerment and teaches them it's only a matter of saying a couple words to speak up. Don't be afraid to challenge. Most people, when you challenge them, they're all talk. They're all bark, no bite.
Yeah, exactly. And in those spaces, there's like a safe word, right? When it gets like too kinky. Like, what's your safe word? And I think that came up in another podcast. I'm trying to remember. There's so many that are happening now, but you know. But yeah, your safe word is just like, yeah, it was definitely not that. It was like, no, I think we should stop at that point, you know.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so you're, you know, at a point now where you're, you know, back in civilian life. You work for like a cannabis company.
That's right. Yeah. So I've, like I said, I was really attracted to the cannabis industry, and so when I was in school, I began making hash, and this was all illicit and illegal.
I love how open you are.
Absolutely, no, it was very much illegal. There was no permitting it, and even in the early days, it was dangerous what I was doing, and it took a long evolution and my own nerd inside of me to really geek out on the topic of chemistry and botanical extractions. And so this passion of mine really stirred from something that started as a hobby. It was a way for me to make my own medicine, if you call it a medicine. It was also to get high, and I think that's just okay too. And so
yeah, that freedom, right? Like, why should the government like regulate someone's free will? You know, I can see in terms of safety, you know, which a lot of us don't have the capacity to make mature decisions, you know, especially like younger ages, with any age really, but especially when we're younger.
Absolutely. And I was really fortunate that I didn't have any injuries or safety things in the beginning. And that hobby, it turned into a career. And so what I was making for myself ended up being a product that people really wanted, and I actually became really good at it. And so this passion of hash making turned into a job, which I was doing mostly on the black market, doing it clandestine, working on properties, keeping bills not in my name, and learning how to be on the other side of the fence. So I went from being in the military to the enforcement side to being on the complete opposite side, where now I'm, you know, surrounded by people who are also doing illicit activities. And so mostly the cannabis and psychedelics. I steered far away from any kind of hard drugs. However, I was definitely on the other side. And so,
well, it's a matter of perspective too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, especially as this culture is now changing, when they're realizing like what's the difference between like even pharmaceutical drugs that so many people are dying from.
That's right.
You know, painkillers, to like alcohol and tobacco kill more people, you know, versus like cannabis and these psychedelic drugs.
When I went to the VA, they put me on pharmaceutical medication when I was depressed. They put me on, I think, an SSRI and an antidepressant. I can't remember. I think one was Zoloft and one was another little pill. And as much as that helped me out in the interim, I was going through a little bit of a crisis when I did get on the medication, and it did help stabilize me. But quickly I realized with the girlfriend at the time that it was cut me off from pleasure. And this was something I wasn't okay with, and I decided to quickly taper myself off the medication. Being from the medical field, I knew how to do it, and I tapered myself off and really pursued the naturopathic route. So just different herbal medications, learning about, how there's different herbs for traumatic brain injury. There's different herbs for PTSD, and not just, these ones that get you high, but there's so many other ones that have helped for anxiety relief and helped with balancing my biochemistry in my body. And so that's kind of where I decided to take an alternative path that the mainstream medicine really wasn't giving me what I needed.
Right, which they had their role and their place when done properly, but unfortunately, that's all they know.
That's right.
And so that's the only option that they give people versus if they had the option of all these other natural ways or means that people could, sort of buffer their pain, so to speak, like what you were doing. So you just basically took it in your own hand.
Absolutely. I let the psychologist at the time know what I was up to. I told him where I was at and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to start working with psychedelic medicines like ayahuasca. And he was very supportive. He was really supportive. He told me, I think you should do that.
Wow.
And he said one bit that was really insightful to me. He asked me, I have one question for you though. Are you going to be okay with the idea of being okay? And I understand that now is a lot of people have an identity to their trauma, an identity to their wounds, and that becomes who they are. I hear people, veterans, they have post-traumatic stress disorder. I myself have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder from the military, but I also call it a normal reaction to stress.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a traumatic time. This isn't a disorder. This is normal response. That your body's reaction, these symptoms are addressing an underlying need, and it's understanding what need is it serving, how to uncover the trauma and kind of get past it. And that's been some of these understandings that with myself that were huge. And it was a big period where I was in denial and then wanted to not be identified with it. I definitely pushed away from it. I was like, I'm fine. And then it took years for me to go, okay, I'm not 100%. And it took me to honesty. And once I was able to open up and talk about it, I realized I'm not alone. Of course, there's support everywhere.
I see like a big sigh as you say it, right?
Yeah.
It's like a sigh of relief that you don't have to like hold this in anymore. It's
That's
like
right.
You can just be open about it
Yep.
and like let go of that gorilla off your back.
That's right. And there's other veterans that are doing amazing work too that it's super inspiring. A friend of yours, Chris Albert, he has Warrior Soul Goji. He's very vocal about what he's going through, his own struggles. Kalani Kreutzberg, Acamies of Canines, another veteran-owned organization. Same thing, open with the struggles. And for me, I see these as models for me to be open as well, because I benefit from seeing their openness and vulnerability. And I know that word vulnerability, gross. It's about being real with myself and the way that I communicate. So instead of hiding what's happening, I just talk about it. And I don't mean vulnerable as I'm going to be, we'll all hold each other and rock each other. As I've been to definitely workshops like that. And there's amazing sweet
kumbaya.
things. Kumbaya.
Yeah.
And it's healing. And at the same time, that's definitely not what I'm asking veterans to do, is to be, that kind of state, but absolutely rely on the people next to you. So much I've learned from people like you, and you've not served in combat, and so everyone has lessons to share. Everyone can learn from everybody.
What was, there's so, it's amazing, like what we've been talking about so far. When you were now sort of stepping into the underground world of these illicit quote unquote drugs, what was going on through your mind? 'Cause you're talking about going into that whole rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I've certainly gone down that, and it's just endless, right?
That's right.
And like speaking of like identity, of realizing like an alcoholic, they had this thing where like once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. But the people that truly heal and integrate don't need to go to like AA, even though it served this role. You eventually like graduate from that,
That's right.
And so in your, I guess, search for other things outside of like your upbringing and like growing up in the Midwest, and then going through the military and seeing that side of things, and then going to hippie Granolaville, and seeing that side of things, and then going into the underworld, and seeing that kind of thing. Like, to me, in my own experience, I've seen like all the upsides, like gold nuggets, as I said earlier, about these things, and then I saw the downsides of this. So, at what point did you realize that like each thing had its role, and then it enabled you to like come out of a place of empowerment instead of being a victim identifier?
I'd say that's a process that I'm even still going through. It's about understanding. For me, it's been about this alignment. I was definitely the Mankind Project, the men's organization that I'm part of, works a lot with men to help realign them with their own mission and purpose in life. And I think through that work has been it's an ongoing process for myself to understand what I'm here for, and for me, tapping into that understanding of more of a spiritual understanding of what I'm here for, it definitely provides even more of a reason to wake up in the morning. I know I've heard you say many times waking up in the morning and having the demons, and I know I definitely have my own demons in the morning as well that want to keep me in my bed and keep me comfortable and keep me there. And at the same time, it's important for me to keep pushing forward and go through the motions, get up, work out. I've been doing inspired through Magic Flow Bus is through coaching from Chuck is the Wim Hof method, and doing the ice water immersion has been an amazing way to almost like a pattern interrupt with this cold water shock to the body.
Yeah, Chuck McGee was on a prior episode of Hangry and Horny. Yeah. So basically through Magic Flow Bus and learning like the cold exposure and the Wim Hof breathing, like basically pattern interrupt you like straight in the morning. Like a lot of people are like, hell no, man, I'm going to take a warm shower, but you found a way to like make that a process to like switch you out of the demonic possession in the morning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And all these things, I think my attraction to psychedelics, to things like the Magic Flow Bus, was these flow states. So these are some of my big experiences, of course, from the first time is being in combat and being in these high stress situations. So you find yourself just acting, not thinking, being in the present moment. I had these situations also occur through rock climbing and through riding a mountain bike downhill where you can't think and you just are in the flow and moving and just responding. These flow states is just that I've been attracted to them, and at the same time realizing like this is how you bring that integration into your life. Like get out of your own way, allow yourself just be in the world and show up. And that's definitely how flow has been showing up for me in many ways.
Yeah, it's just having the courage to go inside and look at your demons, your monsters, and then own up to them. You used all these different tools to help heal. And then, you're having fun, you're finding like other activities, you find meaning, like the spiritual base of like why am I here? How did you get spared? Like multiple, because I know that's like another thing for veterans is like combat guilt.
That's right. Yeah. So you definitely have, there's survivor's guilt that you hear about. Guilt, and there's also, we talked earlier about there's PTSD, which is more of this physiological response to the body from stress. And there's also moral injuries that occur. And this is something I said, I think being in a unique situation as a Navy corpsman and being a non-combatant, I served a different role in combat. I came back with my morality. I didn't do something that I regretted. Many people have. And moral injury shows them in so many different ways. But that's also something else that people are going through. And then you see a lot of suicide. 22 veterans commit suicide every single day. It's 1.5 times the national average. Like currently, as we're sitting here talking, my friend Kalani is humping 250 miles, 22 miles a day, and he's raising awareness for veterans and for his nonprofit that he's part of. And we lost losing more people after the war than during the war, and it's just not okay.
Yeah, because that's the thing that I hear is that you go into this situation like serving your country, and then you're put in a situation where you do something that you never thought you would do, like morally, ethically, that's just horrible, you know, and then feeling the guilt and shame that a human being, including yourself, is capable of doing some horrific act, you know, like that. I guess where the thing would come into, I don't know how often this would have happened in like in Iraq or Afghanistan, but you know, like soldiers like raping women in the village, like on the side. Like, were there cases of that, or that was just like more in the past? Like,
I would say what was more indicative of my experience was our unit was part of the guard force for the Abu Ghraib prison, and so you definitely heard of a lot of injustices happening with the treatment of prisoners during there, and so there was definitely some of that. And just, it's not so black and white when you're in combat, and being in the style of war that Iraq was, of course, it's reminiscent of Vietnam. It's not clear who the enemy is. There is no front line, and
you can't distinguish like who they are because everybody's looking the same.
They all look like civilians. They all look like normal people on the streets, and so you don't know that that person has a bomb underneath their chest. You don't know that he has an AK-47 behind his back, and so you have a lot of these situations where it's just not black and white, and like I said, things happen.
And the language difference. So you're calling out to them like, put your hands up, da da da, and they're just freaking out, and they like make a certain move, and then the soldier shoots them.
That's right. Things like that happen.
Yeah.
Things like that happen, and like you said, when I'm on deployment, I think not so much about what our government's idea and how they're directing us. It's because you're in the combat. For me, I just think about the man next to me and getting home, making sure everybody got home. And yeah, like being witness of just some pretty horrific situations. You know, my heart goes out to all the veterans, not just combat veterans. I think being part of the institutionalization of the military industrial complex has its own negative side effects as well, if you will, from coming out of that. I've been able to empathize a lot with prison inmates and finding similar stories, hearing from their experiences being in prison as people in the military, which is interesting.
Who's this again?
I'm saying is I've had experiences talking to prison inmates, people that were ex-prison inmates, and hearing their stories remind me a lot of my own stories that I experienced in the military. And so, and I know that prison inmates suffer from that institutionalization of the prison system, and then their transfer out, they also struggle as well.
Yeah, the transition part, right? Because one is how long they've been in there, and then they don't have the skills, or there's new technologies that replace like the need for workers. It's happening with, you know, all these self-checkout lines, you know, and so in a sense, like the transition, even mental health wise, like to have the support, and then you're coming home to a country that doesn't understand fully like what's going on. You guys go to protect our nation, protect our values, and then the media has a role in like spinning things, and then people watch the media. Here's your friend that's doing an amazing thing, like humping through Northern Cal to Southern Cal, raising awareness, helping like vets and like with the dogs.
Yeah, he's helping. So what he does is Camis and Canines. The way I met this is a former Marine Corps officer, Kalani. I met him through the Mankind Project. He was my sponsor during my New Warrior Training Adventure weekend, and so he was there as support as I touched a lot of the pain and anger that I had around my military experience and the pain that I experienced. He has an organization, so he himself was a homeless veteran for a short period of time, and so he is reaching out towards other homeless veterans to ensure that there's no homeless veterans. And so what they do is they actually have an animal sanctuary in outside of San Diego, and they actually bring homeless veterans and they lodge them and they put them to work making dog toys, and this is how they're funding the nonprofit. So they make collars, leashes, chew toys out of military clothing, repurposed military clothing. And by giving these veterans a purpose, helping these dogs and helping this nonprofit, It's really helping them feel safe and not be on the streets. And like I was saying, suicide's huge. And yeah, so he's working to, like, he's found his mission, and he's putting that forth. And I think that's been one of the biggest things for me, is this alignment to purpose and understanding what I'm here for. And honestly, I think this is outside of the military. Is I think all people in general finding their own purpose and their own unique expression in this experience that we have.
That's what I was gonna bring up about, like, mental health is a stigma, and it's just basically all human beings, and that there's the hardest places in life are like transitions, like transition at death of a loved one, transition after graduating out of school, there's coming out of the military, coming out of prison, whatever it is that somebody's going through in life, life is obviously a lot of unknowns, and so what I wanted to bring up was like it's so cool that more and more knowledge is coming out about people that are going through transitions and trying to find like their reasons for like actually existing on this planet. And the crazy thing I also wanted to touch was, like, here's your friend Kalani, like, raising awareness through this amazing hike, and people along the way, they're, because they're like, they got their American flag raised as they're like hiking or humping.
Humping.
Yeah. And, there's people are saying like, fuck America.
That's right.
And it's like, on one level, I understand where those people are coming from, because like our country isn't perfect. No country is. But in my travels around the world, like, holy shit, are we like blessed to live in this country, which has amazing values from like our founding fathers, right? And so, it's like, why are you like yelling at somebody that's doing something that's helping people in transition, especially veterans, right? And helping like animals, So it's rough because, everybody's, again, taking on like a role that like something is not right, understandable, until you're like contrasted, like, well, if you hate America, why don't you try living in these other countries where you're not going to be able to have these same freedoms?
That's right. I definitely something, pride of being in this country is something that's not lost. And just like you said, yes, we have, I know people are upset that we have Trump as president. It doesn't take away from me how amazing this country is and what it's done for me. I mean, this is where I've been born. This is where I was raised. This is what feels like home for me. And, I love America for I guess my own view of what I feel America is and my own experience. But, I'm happy about it. I find that it's home.
Yeah, there was a place, like, as I was growing up and being a rebel, because I was like questioning everything, especially in my teenage years, early 20s. I was just trying to understand like the military industrial complex, the corporations, like the raping of our planet, right? Like, how are these things happening? Like, I went down to conspiracy theories, like the bankers, like how the treasury is not even part of the government, and 9/11 conspiracies, and personally having an uncle that went down on a TWA 800 flight where my aunt was waiting for him in Europe, and the plane took off, and eyewitness accounts said that a missile hit the plane. It didn't just blow up because of engine failure, right? So it's just like, we don't know the answers to that, and how, like, the JFK conspiracies, right? There's so many things that we can look at and like blame the government. And the way I'm seeing it now is these are like systems that are in place. They're not perfect, but there's like a momentum behind it. And so it's like, can we stop those things, or can we as an individual affect our immediate surroundings and have impact that way that ripples and changes these natures of these systems? That capitalism isn't perfect, but it's probably way better than communism.
Absolutely.
History has been evident of that. So how can we make more responsible corporations that don't just rely on the bottom line to make decisions that are destroying our planet?
Well, and I think understanding, obviously it always starts at home, and it starts with us. if you're triggered by seeing Donald Trump, then you need to discover your own inner Donald Trump and understand you have a dark side, and it's all a projection. It definitely starts at home and your own community, and spreading your own positivity there, and understanding too, when people talk about corporations, you have spending power. Be conscious where you spend your money.
Yeah, exactly.
And live your life. Experience life, man. Like, don't get so caught up in all the bullshit. It's like, it's just bullshit. It's just chatter.
Right.
Let it go.
And the self-righteousness, which I've been like guilty of, right? Because it's so easy to point fingers and blame everything, be a victim. But, like even with like spiritual bypassing, like, oh, I'm just going to like ignore this and just go within and meditate, and it's going to be peaceful. And like, I'll step out in the world and like, everything's just peaceful. And it's like, no, like if somebody's getting raped down an alleyway, like, you need to fucking do something about it, right? And so some people are like, oh, it's not part of my karma, I'll let them interface and, just keep going. It's just like, what are you, fucking like ridiculous? That's just like
wearing blinders. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me either. No, absolutely. It's like about integration and really like living life and exposing yourself to uncomfortable situations, exposing yourself to people that challenge your beliefs. It's one of the biggest ways that I've grown. I mean, coming from Kansas, being a conservative, Republican, Christian, Bible Club president, to on the black market and on a very liberal, progressive side of the world. And so it's like definitely being on two different sides, and it's made me a better person for it.
Right.
Every time.
You're not ashamed to talk about these things because, a lot of times, like in the media, they'll like attack a political candidate because of their past. And it's like, maybe that person, because of their experiences and like they're realizing like, hey, I learned from this and this is like what not to do, like versus like getting it theoretically or like spoon fed to them like that this is right or wrong.
Right.
Like they're probably more qualified than people that are just like living off of like some 1,000-year-old text per se, It's like
absolutely.
that's super open to questioning. And so, the ability for us to like go inside and really like be honest, like and take inventory of like both the light and the dark, and then make yourself improve and get better and bring that best part of yourself out in the world. The ability for us to even sit here, because I like all these new terms, but some may consider this like an echo chamber. We're basically agreeing with each other. Maybe we should talk about something that we disagree on.
Definitely find that. I feel we can have synergy and disagree on things as well. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you have any disagreements?
Yeah, not one single one, which is so funny.
We'll dive in if we want to dive in.
Yeah, well, I mean, like,
absolutely. And I think especially Northern California can be an echo chamber. I mean, you hear like people like Jordan Peterson are speaking about the social justice warriors and this whole movement that's happening. And you see that happening here in the Bay Area, the culture.
Especially with gender, what they're calling gender lucidity. You may be genetically a male or a female, but you can essentially identify as a different gender or create your own gender,
Yeah.
So that gets a little bit wonky there, because like, how do you address somebody without them getting offended?
Well, that's a major linguistic challenge. To expect people to change their entire vocabulary, it seems like you're not being very flexible, maybe, to the rest of the world slightly. And then also to provide sensitivity around that as well. I mean, absolutely, if someone ever asked me to call them whatever. I mean, I live in Northern California. You got people, a lot of Burning Man crowd, and people, everyone's got their own new name and everything. I'm all about calling them, Moonchild or whatever it is.
Hey, Tony FlowReal,
yeah,
man.
Exactly,
That's my real name.
No, I mean, so I'm all about that, absolutely. Yeah. But of course, I wouldn't want to force anything on anyone either.
Yeah, so I mean, if they do say, can you address me as this, you're like, sure, no problem. But to make it, and that was Jordan Peterson's point, which Canada actually made it a law that you have to address people by their, their pronoun that they choose, or else, like, what, you're gonna like get a ticket, or like you have to pay a fine or go to jail or something. It's like, it should be someone's free right to be able to address somebody like respectfully. You know, if this is what there's like these new ones, as far as I know, like Zur or Zim, and then there's like a whole.
I guess it's infinite. I think, you know, if you want to make friends in this world, you give people, you know, what they ask and show people respect. I mean, that's definitely a way to make friends. Of course, if you don't want to be their friend, you don't want to say it, probably the conversation won't go much further.
Right.
And I guess that's that in context.
And you have every right to do that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting time in the world for sure. You know, what are some of your interests now? I had a chance, for example, in the cannabis facility that you work at
That's
to
right.
see like the development of this stuff and the use of science to create these products, right, that are very like therapeutic for people, and it's amazing to see like the type of states that can be modulated, like engineered, like whatever somebody wants to experience. It could take a particular THC, CBD, and then there's like terpenes and all these other
That's right.
type of things that people can take for a specific experience.
That's right. No, it's absolutely. I have a really amazing front row seat to what's going on in the cannabis industry right now. So the company I'm with, the name is Delta Separations. They manufacture and design stainless steel process equipment for cannabis, and this is for extracting the medicinal oils off the plant and purifying. And this, like you said, they do things like vape pens and topicals. This is also part of the CBD and the hemp movement as well. So I have a front row seat to literally this movement that's happening worldwide. So right now, this same experience that's happening in the United States is happening everywhere. In October, Canada does their final vote, and it's going to open up for foreign trade. And this is going to change the North Atlantic Trade Agreement now that cannabis is going to be on the world market. And this is not just the THC, the aspect that gets you high, but CBD. And of course, there's food and all this, and textiles and building materials that come from this as well. And you're seeing this. Sorry to interrupt, the founding fathers grew hemp for rope and for clothing. We did during
paper.
World War II. The government gave subsidies for hemp, growing hemp during World War II. And so it's been in our culture for a long time. The cannabis plant in many different ways has shown up in history for thousands of years. And so it's great that this is coming back on board. It's becoming legal. I mean, it's providing jobs worldwide. It's considered, might be one of the most profitable cash crops of all time.
And there's so many useful purposes for it, right?
Absolutely.
From pain to state changes to like equipment.
Well,
to building
as somebody
materials.
that has PTSD, CBD has been an amazing tool for me to help not only reduce inflammation, but provides anti-anxiety effects.
Without side effects.
With the psychotropic effects. And so, you know, CBD's been amazing. It's helping kids with epilepsy and seizures. You know, it's helping autism, and it's helping a lot of different spectrums by nourishing the endocannabinoid system, you know, our own endogenous system. We have the ability to process and utilize, and we have different CB1 and CBD2 receptors. You have them in the brain, you have them in the body.
So this is like an argument for we naturally evolved with these receptors, so they're the reason they're there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so CBD is that amazing one that actually is helping the body's own ability to create cannabinoids versus, you know, taking away from it like THC is known to. And so it's just an amazing doorway that this is now kind of opening up for people, and it's great to be on the forefront of this industry. And at the same time, I find myself too, you know, attracted to things like the Magic Flow Bus, and attracted to modalities that I've gone through of neurolinguistic programming and nonviolent communication, and learning ways to interact and help people. And that's definitely where my passion is driving me towards, is ways to connect with people. Having conversations like this for me are very fulfilling.
Yeah, it's really cool because, again, like I think people are craving connection because of smartphones and the internet. It brought connection worldwide, but there was still like the screen that's in between. And so, you know, some people are spending all day in their house, locked up in their room, in front of their computer, and they're getting the same like endogenous chemical releases that are similar to interacting with a human face to face. But, you know, we all know that there's a difference between having like real love making sex to like masturbating to porno per se. Like there's a huge like difference.
It's like it can be fun by yourself. Sure, it can be satisfying. However, nothing beats having another person there.
Yeah, right. The shared experience that was why the Magic Flow Bus in some ways was created, because there's a lot of this, you know, instant gratification, getting information, but not being able to integrate that information and like actualize it. So it became another addiction. And it was like, whoever thought that the drug dealer would be in a technology that we hold in our hand, right? Like, how crazy is that, you know? And so, you know, they learn, like, whether it's advertising, marketing, they know what triggers to hit the dopamine response in the brain, like to get that same effect and enable you to just keep consuming and to finally realize, like, holy shit, man, I think a lot of people are realizing, like, just as fun, I don't want you to take my phone away, like, it's super cool, but I can actually like unplug from it as well and have these like conversations, you know, and fun days of like flow on the Magic Flow Bus, where we're going into ice baths, we're doing saunas, we're eating good food together on a table, where like that was just like part of the values of cultures around the world. People got together and ate together, right? And it was like, you talked about your day, you talked about like what you're gonna, like what you dream about, you talk about like some of your problems you're going through, and then everybody was there to just kind of like chime in, and then there were like these hardcore discussions that like the Greeks were really good at with philosophy, right? Like, what is the type of philosophy that, you know, there's so many different ones that Jordan Peterson talks about, from like the religious angle, from the, like the atheist angle, from like the scientist angle, you know, from like a yogi's angle, or so many.
You found out the Magic Flow Bus, you had that diverse perspectives. I mean, honestly, your events, and I've gone to 2 of them so far, have attracted some amazing high vibrational people. I mean, hey
man, what's up with that word, dude?
That's true.
That's your granola side,
it's
right?
my granola side, man. That's my hippie side. Honestly, amazing people who have so many different skills and lessons that I've learned, from neuroscientists to doctors to breathwork coaches to spiritual teachers. I mean, amazing.
Yeah, big wave surfer. Bro, man.
That was amazing, getting to hang out with Sean and hearing his experiences.
Yeah, you have a medical doctor trained in psychedelics and healing the brain. You know, you have a doctor of hyperbaric oxygen therapy. It's like another tool for, you know, healing, but also like altering your state, you know. So there's all these different experts, as well as like a police officer, or, you know, a veteran soldier, right? Like it's that was my goal, is to bring people all different, diverse places in life, you know, that they chose to interact with, and how we can all learn from each other's experiences. So,
you know, it's an amazing environment, and being around those people opened my eyes to so many different possibilities, and honestly feel like fuel. When I left there, I had obviously amazing dopamine rushes from archery, hitting the target, to walking on the slack line, but even more important was all the oxytocin from all the hugs and all the love that was passed around. And that was where I felt that sense of community, a sense of belonging, and a sense of fun.
Yeah, that's a great point, because we're craving physical contact, and I think a lot of mental issues are probably coming from a lack of physical contact, and it's taboo about like sex, and you know, at least in North America, or like sort of like Protestant, Catholic, Christian based religions. You know, every place is different, but, you know, some places are more liberal than others. Some places are like too liberal, or like people are like cuddling parties, and, you know, like that's cool, like, but that's also kind of like, maybe that, where's your boundary on that? But you know, just simple like eye contact, like saying hi on the street, which is like really refreshing when I go to other countries. Just came back from Ireland, and I felt like people were actually there. They weren't like consumed by their phone. They weren't consumed by whatever was going on in their life. They were actually aware of their surroundings. They were aware of other human beings. So to have an interaction like in the street where it's like somebody's head wasn't down or they were like in fear, you know, I felt like I could have, if I wanted to, just like high five them or shake their hand. And whereas like maybe in California, it's like a different culture where no one knows their neighbors, you know? So this oxytocin release is like huge, man. The ability for people to connect physically without having to be like sexual, you know? And then this whole thing that got perverse between like men and women per se, you know, it's like women, and rightfully so, are now stepping into their power after being maybe suppressed, repressed over a long time, and now but maybe gain the taste of power and like are now like sort of dominating, like in terms of like the feminist movement, where it's like the perverse part of it. And then men on the other center, you know, used to be like alpha, are now like, you know, submissive and not really like expressing their manhood, or if they like to wrestle and get physical, or like to get in fights, or like being sort of told that that's wrong or bad. Like at least from when I like as a kid, like I wanted to do that, and it was like I was like aggressive, and I didn't really have that outlet until I started to play sports, especially ice hockey, where it was like extremely violent, and I got a chance to like get that aggression out, but to have a proper place to do it, you know. And I think that violence would go down, you know, maybe more babies would be made, but you know, it's just like all this education that like Magic Flow Bus is trying to bring out what we wish we were taught, like including sex education, like how to use protection, like how to not have like babies, you know,
how to
like
have the
like
safer sex talk, right?
safer sex
When was the last
talk.
time you were tested? You know,
Yeah.
what do you like? What do you not like?
Right.
It's like, how do we have this conversation? One of the principles under nonviolent communication, which was really profound for me, was the notion of everybody is selfful. And what that means is everybody's has needs, and everybody's out looking to get their needs met. And so the quickly, if we get to the notion of where we can actually communicate, what are your needs that you want to get met, and what are mine, we can work together and collaborate to help each other's needs get met. And that was a really important thing for me to understand, you know, in terms of interacting with people, is understand people have an emotion, but that emotion's coming from a need that's not being met or is being met. Sorry, that's where the emotion comes from. And then recognizing, all right, what's the need, and now how can I make a request or an action to fulfill that need? It's like completing the circuit.
And very transparent without having to use like manipulation tactics, which I see all the time with, you know, sort of what do you call those guys, the pickup artists, you know, right. Or just advertising, marketing, or sales. It drives me nuts because, you know, after a certain time of being manipulated, you kind of see the tricks, you know, and to be able to educate kids on like what these forces are and how to like see the red flags. You know, they're not necessarily good or bad. It's just that some people have certain paradigms, you know, and it comes from insecurity. Like a lot of industry is made out of insecurities. Like maybe we could create a new world where, you know, people are now buying or choosing out of like empowerment versus feeling insecure that they're lacking something and they need that product or they need that person or that house or that money. You know, it's like there's nothing wrong with like being industrial and like, you know, wanting to make money per se. It's just there's a certain quality that I'm noticing now that if somebody comes from a place of security, that's actually super attractive. Like you don't have to like, you know, push people's dopamine buttons or the way it triggers in the brain to get them to do what you want them to do based on your selfish needs.
Yeah, it's almost like the notion of positive psychology, identifying the good versus the bad. Yeah, and it's playing on people's insecurities is a tough one. You know, I'm in sales now, and despise sales most of my life, as I've had so many of those, cold calls that come to the house or weird manipulation tactics. And it's been a great opportunity for me to just empathize with the people that you're wanting to exchange goods and services with, and being very clear about that. And I think it can show up in every aspect of life, even with your friends. It's like understanding this. There is transactions that happen as well, but also at the same time, connection really supersedes the transaction.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, again, Magic Flow Bus, it's like I'm like pitching my own company, but essentially that was born out of frustration. It's to create a world that wasn't utopia. I mean, we're talking about some real stuff that people encounter in life. And here are the tools that are very effective. These are the upsides. These are the downsides. These are the people that are experts in this. Here's the environment that all these triggers are created in a symphony, that puts you in a state of flow that you can go, holy shit, man, I feel like myself. I can be myself. Time just goes timeless. And at the back end of it, it's like holy shit, man, can we live in a world like that? And it's rough coming off a back end of any kind of retreat or a seminar, because you do feel amazing. You're around people that have the same sort of vision for life. And the hardest part is like growing corn afterwards, as I've been told. It's a Hopi saying that I learned from the Flow Genome Project, and it's like taking that information and now integrating it into this world that we live in, and being able to be that example of contrast that people go, holy shit, man, like I want to live like that.
Yeah.
That's super fun. That person like is just being themselves. And it's like there's this great feeling to be liberated that way, and we use all the fucking tools,
Yeah.
So yeah, I really appreciate your perspective on that,
No, absolutely. I feel really blessed, and it's always inspiring for me when people come up to me and they ask, how are you able to smile like you do and have this positive energy when you've gone through such horrific things? And it's a great opener for me then to dive in and ask questions about them. For me, I've learned, I separated this link I used to have between intimacy and sexuality, and was able to separate that. And I realize now that intimacy is allowing someone to see into you for who you are. And that exchange back and forth is intimacy. It has nothing to do with sex.
I thought about the Love Guru with Mike Myers. Intimacy, I see. Into me, I see.
That's right.
Yeah, intimacy. Yeah. So the difference between that and sexuality.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So what was the distinction as we wrap up? What was the difference that you saw between those two words?
Well, I think understanding the separation of needs, and understanding, yes, there's needs for sexuality, and then there's separate needs for intimacy. And I can get those needs for intimacy met not through a woman, not through a lover, but I can be met through my brothers and through my sisters. And having those moments of connection is satisfying my needs that I have for connection, for community, friendship.
Yeah.
Honesty. And so
you said brothers and sisters, some people might take that the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, just people in my community.
Yeah, that's cool. And so as we wrap up, any final thoughts on what we covered? How can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, Nate Rad. I just post my own personal stuff. I know nothing else other than just for fun. And it's a great way for me to connect with other people. And I love doing tags and shout outs to my friends. It's always feels like a good game to me. I just ask people to pay attention to what makes them happy and, what's exciting, and go after it and live life. And every day is always a new experience for me. There's so much joy to be had, man. And I'm just super happy to connect with people like you. To be honest, dude, you're really rad. You're a super cool human being. You're not wrapped up in dogma. You're just real, unapologetic you. And, I appreciate the, example that you're giving people, man, and giving myself. So thank you very much.
Nate, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you sharing your story, being so open, vulnerable, powerful and an example for others that this is possible for healing, and to not be stuck in identity of being a victim, like to honor that time in their lives like you did, and then to be able to transform and move forth in the way that you want to live from here on out, you know. So thank you so much, brother, for coming on to Hangry and Horny and getting hangry and horny. So everybody listening, thanks for listening and tuning in, and stay hangry, stay horny. And Nate, thanks so much for coming on, brother.
Anytime, man.